Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Dr. Jeff Stanley, and I'm a physician with the Virta Clinic. And today we'll be talking about our approach to not managing diabetes, but reversing it. And so I wanted to just start briefly with the experience that most people have with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And that is, despite their best efforts, trying to eat less and exercise more, people tend to gain weight over time. I've seen in my experience that people tend to have low energy, just not have the energy to feel like they can exercise or get out and do things. And then people are put on, an increasing number of diabetes medications, which sadly, I'll explain a little bit about this later. Those medications themselves can actually cause more weight gain and lower energy and other side effects. And the way that diabetes is treated in sort of the traditional sense really is a focus again on management and on people getting so oftentimes gradually worse with time. And so again, what we focus on, and the reason that I joined Virta Health as a clinician, is that we focus on reversing diabetes, meaning that we get people off of medications, we get their hemoglobin A1C or their blood sugar in a normal range, and we help them to lose weight and feel really good. So again, I'm Dr. Jeff Stanley, and I'm a physician here with the Virta Clinic. I'm trained in internal medicine as well as obesity medicine. And prior to joining Virta, I was a primary care doctor for a number of years. And again, what I saw as a primary care doctor was the sort of standard focus on management of diabetes. And I saw that a lot of my patients, despite their best efforts, just weren't getting better. They were needing to be put on more medications and were gaining weight over time and just weren't able to get healthier. And then over time, I discovered that a low carbohydrate approach to eating actually is able to really dramatically affect diabetes and to allow people to, again, get off of medications. And this actually, I came to discover this through my own struggles. So I struggled with my own weight and found that the standard approach of eating less and exercising more, it just didn't work. I felt lousy and really felt defeated. So when I figured out for myself that I could have this approach and cut carbohydrates and feel good, burn fat for energy, then I needed to share that with my patients. So I started working with my patients in clinic on that, and then really realized that I wanted to help people throughout the country to make this dietary change. You'll see the picture there. Those are my two boys, Will and Jack. And the reason I show them is to show that this is actually a very sustainable and easy to follow dietary intervention, even for families. And so they're enjoying a very Virta-friendly dessert of berries with whipped cream. And so Virta, we are the first online specialty medical clinic that's been proven to reverse type 2 diabetes safely and importantly, sustainably, and without medications or surgery. So this is a different approach to diabetes. And it's a focus on reversal, not a focus on management. And the reason that I jump out of bed every day and the reason that I love what I'm doing is because I get to help people like Wilma. So Wilma is a patient of mine who has been actually with the Virta Clinic now for more than a year and has really had some incredible results. So she was in the diabetes range initially and was able to get completely off of insulin, was able to get her A1C down to 6.1. But I'd love to let Wilma join us and tell her story a little bit herself. So hopefully the audio will be working and we can get Wilma to tell us again a little bit about her experience with the Virta Clinic and how she was able to reverse her diabetes.
Okay, so hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Wilma.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Dr. Stanley, for the opportunity to share again my story. I love to sing the praises of Virta because it actually saved my life. Since joining Virta, I was a patient that when diagnosed with diabetes, my doctors put me on insulin right away, and I had to give myself a shot twice a day, which I dreaded. I mean, I would have rather eaten my arm off than to give myself a shot. But so I became a slave to 2 insulin shots a day. And I did that probably for well over a year. And I went in to see my doctor because I was just so tired of giving myself a shot. I was tired of, um, I had no energy. I didn't want to do anything. I couldn't work out. I had such low energy, and I have 5 grandchildren that are very, very important to me. And they're my life, you know, and I I couldn't interact with them the way that I really wanted to interact with them. And so when I talked to my doctor, she suggested that I contact Virta. And at that point, I was really desperate. I was ready to try anything. And I met with you, and you explained to me how the program worked. And it sounded simple. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was a little apprehensive. I'm from, you know, it's like show me. And so once I started on Virta, it was a really simple program to follow. Uh, I got a coach. You were part of the team and very supportive. Uh, I followed the simple eating plan, and in 3 weeks, I was no longer giving myself a shot, which was like, hallelujah. I was just so excited. I just was singing the praises. I was like, oh my God, calling my mother, calling my sister. I'm not taking any insulin anymore. And I just continued to follow the program, and I got exceptional results. I regained energy that I thought I would never have again. I started to walk, and then I started to go to Zumba, and my life just took a complete turn. It took a 360-degree turn, and I felt like, okay, I'm back. I can do this. And it was all as a result of Virta. As a result of following the simple program, my numbers began to fall, and it was just amazing. I started to lose weight, and I mean, I was a big girl. I mean, I was well over 200 pounds, and the weight began to come off, and it was like, oh, this is a plus. And my numbers were still continuing to fall as I just continued to do what was in front of me. The best part about Virta and success on the program for me was that I was given a toolkit that was simply really easy to follow. I had lots of support. I got lots of support from my coach and from you, and it was just amazing. I began to tell others about what the program had done for me. I knew some folks that were suffering also from diabetes, and you know, so I thought, okay, I need to spread the word, and that's what I did. Even now, my friends who I'm still in contact with pre-Virta, they look at me and they tell me, oh, how wonderful I look. And, you know, I explained what it was, and they're like, oh, okay, I have a cousin who has diabetes. I'm going to give her your phone number, or I'm going to give him your phone number. And it's just like spread like wildfire. I shared with anybody that would listen, really, the good news. My grandkids, I do soccer. I I'm even the coach for one of them soccer team, and I've never played soccer, but I'm willing to give it a try. I now go, I do Zumba, and then I stay for yoga. And so my life is just, it's full again. I feel like this program has given me my life back. And I don't have to look back because I have tools that I use on a daily basis for this. My numbers are still going down. My energy level is still very, very high most days. Um, and I'm just excited about the program. And I'm still singing praises. People are still contacting me, wanting more information about the program and how it's worked for me. And I'm loving giving them the opportunity, giving them the information, and it's up to them on whether or not they take the opportunity to learn more about Virta. But because of Virta, I'm here today and I'm living life to the fullest, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. So,
well, that's great, Wilma. Yeah, thank you so much for the support and for how well you've done. And I think one thing that's really important to note is that you've given us at Virta a lot of credit, but I mean, I think it really comes down to your work and you following along with the plan. I mean, that's one of the things I think is so rewarding for what we do, is that we empower our patients to get better. And we understand that this is you doing it. Like, we didn't give you a magic pill, and we didn't give you bariatric surgery. We gave you the right tools and the right plan to be able to follow through with this. And then it's been you and the support of your health coach and your whole team. But I mean, I think that's one thing that people like yourself really take a lot of pride in, is that this is you doing it. It's not a magic pill.
No, it isn't. But the toolkit is so worth it. When I think about where I was, I've been on the program now for 14 months. And when I think about where I was and how hopeless I felt prior to coming to Virta, it just amazes me that the program is so simple. It's just so simple. And, there's a willingness that goes along with it, but the results are so amazing. So I'm happy, healthy, and I'm whole.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Wilma. And for those of you on the call, we'll go into some details as to, again, what the plan looks like and the way that we're able to achieve these results. But I think it is always very helpful to people to see that real people like Wilma are having these results. And the other thing I'll show you too is that these actually aren't abnormal results. So our clinical trial shows that this is actually about what we would expect our patients to see. So yeah, thank you again so much, Wilma, for joining us. And I'm going to jump here now to a little more of our presentation and talk about some of our approach.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Wilma. Bye-bye. So now for the rest of our presentation, I'm going to go into some of the background of type 2 diabetes and the epidemic that we're seeing in our country and really worldwide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem with the dietary guidelines and the reason that diabetes and prediabetes isn't your fault. It really has to do with bad advice that's been given over time. I'm going to talk about why exercise and calorie restriction don't work. So why eat less and exercise more, although it sounds like it makes sense, we see that it just doesn't work in the real world, and particularly not in the long term. I'll talk a little bit about the dangers of pharmaceuticals, so why medications for diabetes may be causing their own issues. And then I'll talk about why our approach at Virta is different. You'll also see in the bottom corner here a link for go.virtahealth.com. So if anyone has to jump off of the webinar early and really wants to get some personalized information as to how your numbers might look in 10 weeks on the Virta program, please feel free to visit that website and enter some information. We're also going to do a couple of polls as we go through here. So I'm going to pose some questions and you should have a poll that pops up on your screen. This is really to get kind of a baseline understanding of what people know about diabetes and prediabetes. So what percentage of Americans do you think have either type 2 diabetes or prediabetes? I'll give you a sec to answer. Okay, so what we see is that actually it's about 4 in 10 US adults now have prediabetes, and 1 in 7 US adults have type 2 diabetes. Looks like people guessed pretty well on that poll, and meaning that 52% of adults in America have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. This means that the average American now is dealing with one of these conditions. And again, I mentioned that the standard of care is a focus on management. So the American Diabetes Association on their website, they tell us that type 2 usually gets worse over time. Even if you don't need medications at first, you may need them later on. And that's the experience that most people have, is a gradual increase in medications over time, despite their best efforts. And then we also see that in a large study of people with diabetes, at Kaiser Permanente, it was a 0.1% remission rate. So that means that people diagnosed with diabetes, 0.1% of them were able to get off of their medications and have a normal blood glucose. And this really means that the average physician could go their entire career without seeing somebody put their diabetes into remission or reversal. And it's honestly something that I see on a daily basis. So just to showcase some of our outcomes, now Wilma talked about her results, but I do want to really stress that, that she's not an outlier. She's not just a, your results may vary sort of situation. She is really on par with what we're seeing in our large clinical trial that I'll speak about. But in our clinical trial, in just 10 weeks, we saw that 87% of people were able to reduce or eliminate insulin. 56% of people got their A1C, or their basically 3-month glucose average, below a diabetic level. And we saw that at 6 months on the program, people lost about 12% of their body weight. This means that a person who weighs 300 pounds would lose over 30 pounds in just 6 months. And again, that's on average. Okay, so now that you have an idea about the kind of the baseline issue that we're dealing with diabetes, let's talk about maybe how we might have got here. So a lot of you may remember this blast for the past, which is the food pyramid. And the food pyramid was introduced back in the late 1970s and early 80s as a way to tell Americans what to eat, to avoid things like diabetes or heart disease. And what you can see here is that the foundation of the pyramid, what we were told to eat, was 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta per day. And what that does, and what I saw in my own experience, was that eating that way caused me to gain weight, caused me to feel lousy, and just really made it tough to be able to get in good health. And when we had that dietary advice, we saw that companies were able to make foods that fit this advice. So you probably recognize all these examples, but just to look at one of them, the Yoplait Light. So that's a low-fat, light yogurt. Unfortunately, if you take the fat out of yogurt, it tastes terrible. So you need to add in sugar to make it taste better. And so a cup of Yoplait Light yogurt like that might have as much sugar as a can of soda. So what we saw is that when the guidelines were published and people were told to base their diet on carbohydrates, they did that. They followed that advice. And what we've seen is that the percentage of people with diabetes has just skyrocketed over time. So we went from, maybe 2-3% of people with diabetes up to, now over 7% and just even going up beyond that. So to take a step back, though, let's think about what that advice did and what it means. So to look at the basic macronutrients, we have carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and alcohol. And no, this doesn't mean that you should make alcohol a foundation of your diet, but it does count as a macronutrient. And now we ask the question, are all calories equal? So if you have these different macronutrients, and again, we're going to put alcohol to the side for now, do those have all the same effect on our bodies? And the answer is clearly no. So carbohydrates, and whether that's brown rice or whether that's sugar, those are going to spike your blood sugar. And again, that's the thing we're worried about with diabetes. Protein doesn't spike blood sugar, and protein will spike blood sugar a little bit, and fat doesn't spike blood sugar at all. So now let's take a step back and let's think about which of those 3 macronutrients requires the most insulin to be processed. We'll talk a little bit more about what insulin does and why it's important, but this is something, just to get a kind of a baseline understanding. All right. And so what we see is that the insulin responses to these foods are different. And in fact, the one that has the highest insulin response are carbohydrates, then proteins, and again, fat causes basically little or no insulin release at all. And as many of you know, insulin is a hormone released from our pancreas that helps to deal with blood sugar. And to give you an idea of the way that insulin works is we like to think of it like a key. So insulin basically works as a key to open up our cells and tell the cell to take up blood glucose. And so meaning when you've eaten a meal, your insulin is going to be released. That's going to tell your cells to absorb glucose, and that will lower your blood glucose. So that's a good thing. But the other thing that it is insulin is the fat storage hormone. And the way that we think about that is, so when your body is basically disposing of glucose, so you have glucose in your blood and your insulin is released and it tells your body to store glucose. But at the same time, insulin is also telling your fat cells to store fat and to stop burning fat. And that's going on the whole time that insulin is elevated. So I think this is a good way to illustrate this. And what we look at here is a normal blood sugar in someone without diabetes would be about 100 milligrams per deciliter. We see that in the average person, there are about 5 liters of blood in your body. And in that entire 5 liters with a normal blood sugar of 100, you'd have about a teaspoon of glucose just in the entire bloodstream, so about 5 grams. Now let's contrast that with a cup of brown rice, which a lot of us have been told is a healthy meal, right? So that would have 45 grams of carbohydrates. And now that 45 grams of carbohydrates, that actually corresponds to 9 teaspoons of sugar. So now think about what happens when that 9 teaspoons of sugar goes into our bloodstream. So that's very quickly, again, absorbed through our stomach into the bloodstream, and we have a huge spike in blood glucose. Now, when blood glucose goes up like that, our body again releases insulin, and that basically helps us to store that glucose or to put it away in the cells. But we have a very different response based on how carbohydrate tolerant we are. So let's look at these 2 examples of people. On the left here, we have our person with a high carbohydrate tolerance, and that's the jerk that we all know who is able to eat whatever carbohydrates they want. They can eat nothing but bread, pasta, cake, and whatnot, and their blood glucose stays normal and they don't gain weight. So they have a high carbohydrate tolerance, and their blood sugar goes back to normal very quickly, even when they eat a lot of carbs. Now, the person, which is again more than half of the country right now, has a low carbohydrate tolerance. And when they eat that same exact cup of brown rice, they have a larger increase in their blood glucose, a larger increase in insulin. And again, during that time when the insulin's around, they're having more fat storage and less fat burning. So when we think about this carbohydrate tolerance, let's think about it in the case of insulin resistance. So as you eat carbs over your tolerance, your body needs more insulin to get that same response and get a normal blood glucose. So your body releases more insulin. But with time, your body becomes less sensitive to the insulin that's around, and you need to have a higher and higher amount of insulin in order to get that same response. And at the point when the body stops responding as well, that's when people tip over into prediabetes and then finally into diabetes. So the standard of care, what we generally see again is a focus on management. And the management, what we're looking to do is to reduce blood sugar. So this was, what I was taught during my training, and what most physicians do outside of Virta. And the first thing to do is to increase insulin. So giving either injections or medications that cause our body to release insulin. Another way is to indirectly reduce blood sugar through other diabetes meds. So something like metformin that you might be familiar with. And then finally, to decrease body weight in order to reduce blood sugar. And the common advice is eat less and exercise more. And if that doesn't work, then we consider something like bariatric surgery. So now let's talk about why exercise and calorie restriction don't work. So along with that standard of care, remember the doctor will generally tell patients to lose weight when they're first diagnosed. So that's either, so go exercise, go on the treadmill, go on the elliptical trainer, eat less, so eat nothing but low-fat dressings and salad. And again, if that doesn't work, there's the option of bariatric surgery. Let's talk about why that doesn't work. A lot of you may remember the television show The Biggest Loser. That's a show where people with obesity were told to severely restrict their calories, exercise to the point of exhaustion, and then were weighed to compete with one another. And what was seen is actually there was a study done afterwards where they looked at all the people who won, and they looked at how they did 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And sadly, most of them regained their weight. And I'll show you that that's basically due to that eat less and exercise more approach, which just doesn't work. So this person, Sean, before the show, he was 444 pounds. He got down to 289 pounds by the finale and then again won. But then now he's back up to 450 pounds. So he's back past his initial weight. And the really sad thing and difficult thing is that his metabolic rate, so he now burns 458 fewer calories a day than would be expected for someone who weighs 450 pounds. And this also means that his metabolism is probably slower now than it was when he started the show initially. And so that we see that is why just focusing on weight loss is not an effective approach to reducing or reversing diabetes. And what I learned, and what a lot of people also have learned, is that eat less and exercise more just doesn't work in the long term. So now let's talk about some of the dangers of medications. And again, the next part after people try their best to lose weight, to exercise more, eat less, generally in most people that is not effective. We find that most people, their blood glucose gets a bit higher and then they advance to needing medications. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. Again, we can indirectly reduce blood sugar through some pills and other medications, or directly increase insulin through injecting it. But let's take a look at what can happen when someone injects insulin. Now, we're sort of told that that's the best way to control diabetes, but in fact, there are some negative effects of that, and then very negative effects in some cases. So the first thing we see here is actually what would be expected. So this ACCORD trial was supposed to prove that basically managing diabetes very tightly with high levels of insulin would be beneficial for patients and would lead to less complications, lower risk of death, and a whole number of things. So the first thing we saw, again, not unexpected, is that this intensive arm, so that's the group that got more insulin injections in order to better control their blood glucose, they gained more weight. So they were injecting themselves daily with the fat storage hormone insulin. And not unexpectedly, they gained a bunch of weight. So they gained about 5 kilograms more than that standard group. But the next part of it, this really surprised people and really sent some shockwaves through diabetes management. And what this graph shows is that they actually had to stop the test early, the trial early, because they were seeing that this intensive therapy arm, the group that was getting more insulin, was actually having a higher rate of death. So they were more likely to die than the group that had less well-controlled blood sugar on less insulin. And this begs the question of, do you think that your diabetes medications are helping you to get better? This may not be something that you've considered too much before, as a lot of times it's kind of taken for granted. But it really, I think from the information I showed you shows that maybe these meds aren't helping. Okay, so we've looked at, we've gone through the basics of diabetes, we've gone through the dietary guidelines and the problems with that. I've talked about why eat less, exercise more doesn't work, and we've talked about some of the dangers of medications. But let's talk now about a different approach to diabetes, which is reversing it. And a lot of you may be able to guess the approach that Virta uses, but I'll like to give you some details as to that. So first, for just a basic definition here, basically diabetes is diagnosed through a hemoglobin A1C of greater than 6.5, a fasting glucose of over 126, or an oral glucose tolerance test. So if these are the criteria for diagnosing diabetes. What does diabetes reversal mean, do you think? And what we look at as to what diabetes reversal means is really a couple of things. So it's getting a normal blood glucose or a normal hemoglobin A1C without requiring medications to do so. And that's something that might seem far-fetched to people, but I'll show you that that's actually been the norm in our clinical trial and in our other patients. So we have these different approaches to reducing blood sugar. Remember, we can use the standard of care, which indirectly does this through adding medications, weight loss, things like that. Or we can use some common sense and we can directly reduce blood sugar by significantly reducing our carbohydrate intake and relying on energy from burning fat. And I'll tell you about how that works. So to look back here at our examples of a person who's eating carbohydrates over their tolerance or under their own tolerance, you can see that, and we already talked about this sort of vicious cycle on the left, but on the right, what we can see here is that reversal of type 2 diabetes, when someone eats carbohydrates under their personal tolerance, they need less insulin, remember, to get a normal blood sugar. Their body releases less insulin then because the body is very good at sensing how much is needed. Get more sensitive to the insulin that's around, and it sets up this virtuous cycle where people are able to lose weight, get a normal blood glucose, and do all of this really by eating carbohydrates under their own personal tolerance. I think it's important to note again that this is differs so much from person to person. Some people won the genetic lottery and they have a huge carbohydrate tolerance, but most of us, that's not the case. And so we just need to find that personal tolerance and eat below it. And remember that fat doesn't raise your blood sugar. So we've been told for decades to fear fat, eat low-fat foods, stay away from that, it'll clog your arteries. But in fact, fat is the one nutrient that doesn't raise our blood sugar. And again, we can also train our body to burn fat for energy. So let's talk about how that works. So in our dietary plan, we use a restricted carbohydrate diet known as a ketogenic diet or nutritional ketosis. And what this means is that our body is able to take the dietary fat that we're eating or the fat that lives in our fat cells, convert it in the liver over to ketones. And ketones are basically a molecule that our brain, our heart, and our muscles are able to use for fuel. And in a normal range, it is a very effective fuel product for the body to burn. And so a lot of this, again, it may sound too good to be true. We talked about Wilma's amazing results, and this sounds like something, maybe a few people have done that. But in fact, we're doing a large clinical trial in Lafayette, Indiana, with more than 200 people with diabetes. And what we see in the results here, and I've alluded to those before, but we've seen some incredible outcomes. So 87% of patients reduced or eliminated insulin. Again, 56% got their A1C in the normal level, and 12% body weight loss at 6 months. And so what that shows in our trial is, again, these are not outliers. We're able to, in the majority of our patients, reverse type 2 diabetes and not just manage it. And so our mission as a company is this very ambitious goal to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people by 2025. And briefly to show you the founders of our company. So on the ends there, Dr. Steve Finney and Dr. Jeff Volek are researchers on low carbohydrate diets who have hundreds of papers published between them and have shown this over decades that this is a safe and effective approach and it's not a fad diet. And then in the center, we have our CEO, Sami Inkinen, who has the technology expertise of starting the company Trulia, the real estate app. And what he brings to it, our company, is the ability to take that, the intervention that we know works, a medically supervised ketogenic diet, and scale that to people to their pocket, basically, and their smartphone. So we put a doctor and a health coach and all this information, in the palm of your hand. So think about this ability of us to get 56% of patients with type 2 diabetes to get a normal hemoglobin A1C. And many of you on this call, it may have been years since you had an hemoglobin A1C below the diabetic level. And that's, again, despite trying your best, despite taking your medications, despite exercising, despite following all the advice that you've gotten from people. So let's focus on this common sense approach of directly reducing blood sugar through the correct dietary intervention. And let's look at food as medicine. So when you are eating the correct foods that don't raise your blood sugar, your body, again, is able to get into this state of ketosis, burn fat for energy, and to be able to reverse the signs and symptoms of diabetes. And so rather than taking medications or pharmaceuticals, we're able to have the food that we're eating really help heal our body. And to give you a little bit more detail about how we do this, so here you'll notice Wilma again. She's been happy to appear in some of our pictures here. So again, we start off with biomarker tracking. So you're checking your blood glucose, blood ketones, and other markers and entering them into our app. So that information is continuously monitored by your health coach, and our health coaches are dietitians, nutritionists, and basically nutritional experts who are able to give you daily feedback and support. In addition, you have your Virta physician. So someone like myself or one of our endocrinology or medicine specialists who are able to monitor you through basically continuous remote monitoring. So we're seeing the blood glucose levels and making medication changes on a real-time basis to make sure you don't have highs or lows. And in addition, we're able to do telemedicine visits. So like a Skype visit or something very similar to this Zoom webinar, where you're able to see your doctor from the comfort of your own home. So a lot better than having to sit in the doctor's office for 3 hours to see your doctor for 10 minutes. In addition, we also have resources. So we have recipes, videos, guides, and these are all available directly through the app. So you can do this, while you're sitting on the bus or while you're, waiting for your food to be ready or whatever you want to do. You can get this as you need it. And then finally, a huge portion of this is our patient community. So we have an optional online patient community where our patients are able to share their successes with each other, share their struggles, and to be able to work together to support each other for a common goal. So the other part with this is that, sometimes people wonder, well, I don't know if I can follow a diet that restricts carbohydrates or to follow a program like this. But what we see is that, so in our clinical trial, we have 91% of people were able to stick with this for 10 weeks. Which sounds pretty good, but even better at 6 months, we have 89% of people staying with the program. And what I've seen throughout this is that when people follow an approach that works, they stick with it. I mean, all of us have tried a Weight Watchers type of approach or Jenny Craig, where you're counting calories, you're hungry all the time. It works for maybe a few months, but people don't stick with that. That's why those companies are so successful, because of the repeat business, right? And so what we'd rather see is that people stick with us and that we maintain them on a continued path to success. And you heard that from Wilma today, that she's been on it for 14 months now, and really her coach continues to help her throughout this. So we can achieve all of these incredible results through no calorie counting, by eating delicious and real foods until satisfied, and with no exercise required. Now with exercise, we know some of our patients love to exercise, and if that's the case, then by all means keep doing it. It's great for your health, it's great for your heart health and mental health and everything. But what we see is that, telling people to go out and burn calories and exercise when they're dealing with obesity and arthritis and fatigue and diabetes, it's just not necessarily a rational approach to it. So as people start to lose weight and feel better, we by all means add in exercise, but it's not a required portion of our program. So this little warning sign is just a reminder to tell people that, while this is an incredibly effective and been shown to be a safe intervention, we always caution people not to do this on your own without medical supervision, and particularly if you or your family members or loved ones are on diabetes medications. Because what can happen is those diabetes medicines, as I talked about, those lower your blood sugar. And if your blood sugar is lowered by the medication, and then it's also lowered by what you eat, then you could have this sort of double whammy where your blood sugar goes dangerously low, and it's possible that people can die from hypoglycemia or low blood glucose. And so we always say that before you're going to start on any sort of dietary change, consult with a physician and have that supervision so that somebody can manage your meds. To summarize and to contrast the standard approach to diabetes management and the Virta approach to diabetes reversal, it's really stark. So we see that with the standard approach, we increase medications, weight goes up, right? And again, the medications themselves drive a lot of that weight gain. We see that in the standard approach, expenses go up. So a lot of you may be spending a significant amount of money on your insulin. Or other newer medications that can cost quite a bit. We see that the eating options are limited, and exercise is often considered to be required in order to get those effects. And we can do all of this with reducing meds, reducing weight, costing you less money on your medications. We can do this without calorie counting and with exercise as a nice addition, but as optional. So if you'd like to learn more, and again, we have a calculator that'll allow you to predict what your results could look like in just 10 weeks and then beyond, I would recommend that you visit this go.virtahealth.com site. And you can also set up a chat with one of our intake specialists to be able to learn more about what we're doing. There's no obligation, but it's a good way to get some information, and you can take that step to really changing your life and changing your health. So now we also are going to have a little bit of time for some question and answer. So you should get a prompt allowing you to enter in questions. And once I start seeing those, I can start answering them. So we'll kind of go for maybe the next 15 minutes or so, or for as long as people have questions. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to learn about this. And I know I get very excited about it because honestly, when we see patients go through this, it's the norm that people get better, that people are getting off of medications, that they're losing weight, that they're reversing all of these processes that have been going on for years. So it's always fun for me to talk about this because I see people's lives totally change. So go ahead and add in any questions. Okay. Looks like we have a couple coming in. So the first one we have here is, what is a quote unquote normal blood sugar? So that is a great question. And, that a lot of it is really determined by when they look at large numbers of people and, large populations. And so, what's considered a quote unquote normal blood sugar would be a fasting glucose of below 100 milligrams per deciliter. And then a non-fasting, basically if you're below 200 after a meal, that would be considered to be within the normal range, although some people might argue that that's too high. And again, that would be probably in the setting of a higher carbohydrate meal. And again, then the other thing we see is this range between 100 and 126. That would be a pre-diabetes fasting glucose, and then above 126 would be in the diabetes range. And so our goal is to get people, really keeping their blood glucose below 100 as much as possible. And then that hemoglobin A1C, the average glucose, we'd like to get that below 6.5. And let's see, another question we have here is, will you be posting a link to this webcast recording so we can share with friends and family? And the answer to that is yes. So we'll be able to post that. And yeah, feel free if you know anyone that would benefit, friends, family, coworkers, please feel free to share. Next question we have is, what is a ketogenic diet and can you explain? Yes, so that's a fantastic question, and I apologize if I wasn't clear enough during the talk. So a ketogenic diet is basically a nutritional approach where people limit carbohydrates to, traditionally it's less than 30 grams, but it's really personalized. And the goal for it is, again, when you get your carbohydrate intake low enough, below a certain threshold, your body makes these ketones. So beta hydroxybutyrate is the name of it. And so when you start to create those ketones in the blood above a level of 0.5 millimoles, what that allows people to do is to burn both ketones and glucose. So the ketogenic diet was actually initially developed about 100 years ago at the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins to treat epilepsy in kids. So it's been around for a long time, but there are different versions of it. And the one that we use, again, is aiming for low carbohydrates, moderate protein, and higher fat, and basically fat to satiety. So then the next question we have is, do you include intermittent fasting as part of your protocol? With regards to intermittent fasting, one of the things that's tricky with that is that there are a number of different definitions as to what people consider intermittent fasting. So that can, some people would consider that fasting for 3 days or 5 days or 7 days, and other people would consider it more of just skipping a meal. And so our approach is that basically, we recommend less than a 24-hour fasting if someone is going to be fasting. The reason for that is we start to see some potential muscle breakdown after 24 hours. And then also there can be a risk of electrolyte abnormalities. So like potassium, sodium, magnesium can get out of whack, and there can be a risk of a heart rhythm abnormality. So, in terms of intermittent fasting, if people want to eat during a smaller window of the day, so maybe just eat breakfast or just eat lunch and dinner, or if people want to occasionally skip a meal because they're not hungry, those are totally fine. But we always caution that people, be careful about really more of the prolonged fasting. Okay, the next question we have is, can patients achieve reversal on LCHF but not ketogenic diet? Many patients seem to tolerate lower carb but struggle on ketogenic diets. And so LCHF, that is a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Sometimes people will call it high healthy fat diet. And I think that we do see that some people are able to reverse diabetes with using just a lower carbohydrate approach and not necessarily going into a full ketogenic diet. We have a number of patients who don't tend to get into ketosis very well. So actually Wilma from today is a great example that she actually struggled a lot getting into ketosis, but she had great results. So it's not a necessity. What we do find is that being in ketosis itself seems to have a whole bunch of effects beyond just restricting carbohydrates. So that it tends to lower inflammation. It tends to have some improvements in cognition. There are a whole lot of things that are being sort of discovered right now. So, I personally follow a ketogenic diet because I feel that I feel the best with that. And I think there are a lot of potential benefits to it. But I think that for some patients, they can get very, very good results just from a low carb diet. Okay, and then we have another question here. So for type 2 diabetic patients with long-standing, so decades of being diabetic, or poorly controlled blood sugars, so something like a hemoglobin A1C of 14, have you seen similar good results, and how fast? So we absolutely have seen incredible results with people with diabetes for decades. I know Wilma said she'd only really been on insulin for a year, but I've had people who have been on insulin for 2 decades or been diabetic for 20 to 30 years who are able to get off medications within a few weeks. It's very personalized. So people that if their body's no longer making as much insulin, there's the chance that they may have a slower process. I just saw a gentleman the other day who he went from a hemoglobin A1C. This was one of our better examples, but his A1C went from 14 to 5.6 in 4 months. So it definitely can happen. But it depends again on the person's kind of personal physiology and biology. So then the next question we have here is what about this program will keep me on it? It is so easy to fall off the wagon. I love that question. And so before I joined Virta, again, I was a primary care doctor. And through my own experience and through what I saw in my patients, I fully believed that a low carbohydrate and ketogenic diet was the way to go. So I recommended that to my patients. And what I saw was that some people had great results, and with just some basic information, maybe a book. But most people would inevitably run into a some sort of roadblock. So they would, have a family emergency or a vacation or an illness or something that came up, and then they would not come back for their follow-up visit, and they would kind of lose a lot of the results that they had got. And so the thing that's huge about what we can do at Virta is we have, so the app, we have a cellular connected scale so that you step on it every day and your coach sees that. And then you have this health coach that you build a relationship with. So everyone's going to fall off the wagon. That's inevitable. But what we do is we find that, when you fall off the wagon or when you go on vacation, that we have someone to bring you back in easily and with kind of less friction, right? So we say, okay, hey, I saw that, you gained a few pounds, or that, your blood glucose is going up. Let's pick a date to restart. Maybe it's in a week, maybe it's tomorrow, and let's get back on track. And I've been amazed by how well that portion of it has worked. I mean, we see that, again, more than 80 to 90% of people are sticking with it, and that the vast majority of those people are having continued success. And it's not a smooth, perfect landing. There's some bumps along the way, but it definitely keeps people on the program. And then another question we have here is, can you speak to the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis with a type 2 diabetic person on a ketogenic diet? Yeah, this is a fantastic question, and one that we get from healthcare providers and a number of people. So for just some definitions for everyone. So diabetic ketoacidosis is a condition generally where people don't have enough insulin. So that can be in someone with type 1 diabetes where their body doesn't make insulin at all, or it can be in someone with longstanding type 2 diabetes. But basically what happens is they have very high blood glucose and they have very high blood ketones, and then their blood becomes acidic, and it can be incredibly dangerous. So it requires being in an intensive care unit. And the big difference between those is that, so nutritional ketosis is a normal physiologic condition that happens if someone fasts for, say, more than half a day, 24 hours, or if people restrict carbohydrates. And ketoacidosis is about a 10-fold higher level of blood ketones. So it's a pathologic condition that occurs only when people are sick, or if they stop injecting their insulin, or if something abnormal basically happens. So that there's a far range. It's kind of like anything, whether you look at blood glucose or potassium or whatever, there's a normal range and then there's a dangerous range. But the ketones in and of themselves are not dangerous. And our patients don't have acidic blood when they're in ketosis. And so the risk of it is extremely low for people with type 2 diabetes. What we do is we monitor people's blood ketones on a daily basis. So we're able to see if someone's blood glucose goes way up, or all of a sudden their ketone level goes way up, we can make sure that they're not sick, or that they're not having, forgetting their insulin. And then the other part of it is, again, it's just a different process. So it's different for someone with type 2 diabetes. We've not seen it in our clinic, and it's just really something that's very rare in the case of the ketogenic diet. We also manage the medications really closely, so we don't just stop the insulin cold turkey, or we are careful about other medications as well. Okay, another question we have here is, how is this different from an Atkins diet? So a lot of people on the call here, may have done a low carbohydrate diet in the past, whether that's an Atkins diet or a South Beach diet or Dukan. There's a whole bunch of them. And so the main differences that we see, so first of all, we work on, it's much more than a diet. So, we have physician supervision, biomarker tracking, health coaching, the app, all those things that are sort of full service online clinic and not a diet book. The other portion of it is that, so we recommend, a lot of times the traditional Atkins diet is sort of all meat, is what people generally think of. In our case, again, we're looking for moderate protein. We actually have people that are vegetarian that can follow our program. So that's another difference. Again, and then the sort of specific tracking of ketones, so through blood ketones. And then the sustainability as well. So we're looking at this as not a crash diet, but as a long-term way of eating that people can stick with. And so we could go, and there are more differences as well, but those are kind of the big picture ones. Next question we have is, can you give me an example of what a Virta-friendly dinner would look like? And let let's see if I can scroll back here. So the example in the center there is perfect. So that would be, tri-tip steak with asparagus and a hollandaise or cream sauce on it. Another example might be a piece of salmon with a spinach salad on the side and some broccoli with cheese melted on it. Again, we have a number of vegetarian patients, so it's not to say you have to eat meat, but if a lot of people enjoy that and they can, have that as a healthy portion of the diet. And then another question we have is, so do you glucose monitor ketones, and how does the biomarker tracking work? So we use at this point the Abbott Precision Extra Meter. The reason for that is it's at the time of when we started our trial, is the only FDA approved meter that can track ketones. But it also does blood glucose. So that uses basically different strips. So you can use the same meter, but ketone strips and glucose strips. Those values are entered by you into our app. And it's a very easy interface to enter those numbers in. Again, the scale is automatically downloaded, but currently the biomarker tracking happens from checking the blood values and then entering them into the app. Let's see. And then, the other thing is we provide all of that. So we provide the ketone strips, which can be quite expensive if you try buying them on your own, as well as the glucose strips and the glucose monitor. Okay, another question we have here is, I am an underweight diabetic and I lose weight very quickly on a ketogenic diet. Why do you think that is? So we see that, again, there's a very individual response. It seems like most people lose weight pretty quickly on a ketogenic diet, whether they're obese or whether they're thin. Some of that is that there's a good amount of satiety. So people feel full and they tend to sort of spontaneously eat a bit less calories. Now, for someone who is, let's say they're underweight and they don't want to lose weight, they have to work a little bit on getting enough calories. So our coach can help you, make sure, okay, how many calories are you eating? Do we need to up this a little bit? Are you getting enough healthy fats? And we also see that, again, that based on ethnicity, genetics, there's a lot of differences as to how people respond and how people get diabetes. So a lot of people of Indian or South Asian descent, they develop diabetes without gaining any weight. So they're often very thin, but can still have diabetes. And so we can still see all the improvements in blood sugar and hemoglobin A1C and getting off meds, but sort of absent the weight loss, which is fine. Another question we have is, does this help with neuropathy? And as a lot of you may know, so neuropathy is basically a numbness and tingling in the extremities. Usually people have like numbness of their toes or fingers, very common with diabetes. And so we see that, we know that this does help in that lowering blood glucose tends to help with neuropathy. It doesn't always reverse it, but it definitely can reduce the progression. The other thing we've seen just anecdotally, so in some of our patients have noted impressive improvements in their neuropathy. So we have one example that really struck me where a patient had lost feeling from basically their shins down, and they went to the beach for the first time in a few years and realized that they could feel the water on their feet again. And so again, that's not anything that's been shown, proven in the trial or anything, but we've heard that from a number of patients. And there's reason to believe with both the lowering of glucose and then also some of the potentially lowering inflammation effects of the ketones. So another question we have here is, do you measure blood insulin levels? So we don't measure blood insulin levels as a standard test for our patients. One thing is it tends to be a fairly expensive test. So sometimes our patients will request that from their doctor and get that done, and we can certainly interpret it. We are checking that in our clinical trial, and so we're reporting all those results as to how it will affect blood insulin. But unfortunately, it's currently a pretty expensive test and also not one that's easily done at home, such as the glucose or ketones. So then the next question we have here is a high-fat diet going to make gallbladder, quote unquote, sludge worse? And so that's a great question around gallbladder and gallstones and sludge, in that We actually see that a lot of the issues with gallstones have oftentimes been in very low calorie or very low fat diets. And the reason is that the gallbladder squeezes in response to dietary fat. And when someone is on a very low calorie or very low fat diet, the gallbladder basically sits sort of dormant, doesn't squeeze as much, and stones can build up. And then what has happened in some cases is then people start a ketogenic diet, they start eating more fat, their gallbladder kind of wakes up and starts squeezing, and all of a sudden they start noticing maybe some discomfort in their right side there. So in terms of the evidence that I've seen, it doesn't tend to contribute to stones or contribute to sludge, but it's possible in some cases it can kind of trigger some symptoms. But long term, it actually appears there's some evidence that it can lower the risk of these. Okay, I love this. A lot of great questions. Fantastic. Keep them coming. Okay. It looks like, yeah, we are all done. So thank you all so much for staying to the end. Hopefully nobody fell asleep at their desk. We've gotten a ton of great questions, and I'm sure that people have actually a lot more that you'll be able to think of. So please, go to the website at go.virtahealth.com. Enter your information, feel free to set up a call with one of our specialists. They can answer, they love talking about this, and they can answer questions around ketogenic diets for hours. And so remember, if you want to go in and look at some of your personal information, the way that you could calculate the way your A1C might look in 10 weeks, how much weight you might lose during that time, you can do all that, and then you can take the next steps towards signing up. So again, yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully got a lot of your questions answered. So hope you all have a wonderful weekend.